Professor Chomsky, when one talks about propaganda, when you talk about the examples you've just cited, that would suggest an element of control of what the media publishes. That's taking us a step beyond what we had previously.
See if I understood. Stronger than the past? No, it's weaker than in the past. And the reason, if you go back to the 1960s, 1970s, 80s, was much worse, incomparably worse. I've written thousands of pages about this. It's actually better now. And the reason it's better is because the activism of the 1960s and its aftermath did have a civilizing effect on the United States and other countries. That's why it's called the time of troubles, terrible time, because it civilized the societies. That's very dangerous. A lot of the journalists who are now writing have that background. They came out of that experience. Their minds were somewhat opened. So there's somewhat more critical discussion now than there was in the years in the past, even in the mainstream. It's pretty bad now, but we forget how incredibly awful it was then. I mean, take the Vietnam War. We're now coming to it's the worst crime after the Second World War. There's nothing to compare with it. Three pure aggression, three countries destroyed, millions of people killed, vast devastation, people still dying from chemical weapons. There's just nothing to compare with it. To this day, in the mainstream in the United States, you cannot call it a crime of aggression. All you can say is it was a mistake. We didn't use our power wisely. At the left end of the spectrum, our bungling efforts to do good didn't work. In fact, the war is framed. You'll see this on the anniversary when there will be a lot of discussion. The war is framed as a war of defense of South Vietnam against North Vietnamese aggression. That's about 100% of commentary and scholarship. It was a war against South Vietnam. South Vietnam was the main target of the war all the way through. South Vietnamese resistance was what you called the Viet Cong here, was virtually decimated, along with much of the civilian society. There was a pretty harsh attack against North Vietnam, but that was on the side. It was trying to prevent North Vietnam from helping protect the South Vietnamese from US aggression. Try to say this. Nobody will even know what you're talking about. I mean, it's just not English. It's some Martian or something. It's exactly what happened. The documentation, the history is just overwhelming. There's no question about it, but it's inexpressible. Now, the Iraq War, we're now coming to the 20th anniversary. We'll hear the same. I mean, that's only 20 years, but it's the same. The most critical comment you can make about the Iraq War is it was a mistake. It was an effort to, yesterday in the New York Times, it was an effort to protect Iraq and the world from a mad dictator, but it didn't work. It's ridiculous. Yes, Saddam had carried out criminal acts, but it's necessary to suppress the unpleasant fact that Saddam's worst crimes were carried out with strong US support. His worst crimes were in the 1980s. Chemical warfare, Halabja, all the things he's condemned for. The United States strongly supported them. Go back and take a look. It wasn't secret. In fact, even after all of this, the first President Bush invited Saddam to send nuclear engineers to the United States for advanced training in weapons production. That was after his worst crimes, off the record. There's now, in the newspaper today, you can read articles blaming Putin for the Malaysian airliner. Probably tomorrow they'll blame him for the Turkish-Syrian earthquake. But whatever the truth of this, is it the first time an airliner's been blown up? What about the USS Vincennes, which attacked an Iranian commercial airliner in commercial airspace? No ambiguity, shot it down, killed 290 people, went back to its base in Virginia, where it was celebrated, given a medal. The commander and the flight officer who shot it down were given medals of honor. President Bush said, "I will never apologize for the United States." What about that? What happened to that? It was a pretty serious incident. Quite apart from the atrocity, it convinced Iran that there's no hope of their prevailing in the Iraq-Iran war. Iraq invaded Iran with US support, murderous, hundreds of thousands of killed with chemical weapons, all supported by the United States. The shooting down of the airliner made it perfectly clear to Khomeini that we just can't fight this war. We can't fight the United States. And they settled for what amounted to a surrender. It was an important event. Can you discuss it? It's impossible. If you try to talk about it, even elementary facts, people, again, they think you're just talking some foreign language. It's not our language. I mean, but this, to get back to your question, this is a lot better than the 1960s and 70s and 80s, much better. At least there's some arenas in which you can discuss it. And you even find critical voices breaking through occasionally in the mainstream media. There are now columnists in the New York Times, like Jamel Bouie, who you couldn't imagine there 20 or 30 years ago. So it's bad, but it's better.